Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Dr. Ashley here. Today I want to talk a little bit about identity crises, especially when you are injured. But first I want to thank you guys for subscribing to our YouTube channel and tuning in. We are so grateful and thankful that you're here. Make sure that you subscribe below. And as always, if you have questions at the end of this, don't hesitate to ask. But before I get started, I want to make sure that you guys stay tuned to the end because I'm going to give you some of my favorite tips that I tell athletes to use to try to help prevent an identity crisis from happening, especially if you've been injured in sport. So let's dive a little bit deeper. First off, what is an identity crisis? An identity crisis is basically something that makes you go, oop, I've lost a little bit of a sense of myself. And whether that be you are a runner who can't run, whether you're a soccer player who can't play soccer, whether you're a skier who can't ski, if something gets taken away from you, all of a sudden you go into this little bit of a spiral saying, oh, what do I do? I'm not going running on a daily basis. I'm not going to practice, and I'm not really getting through or doing the things I love. And that can be a really, really tough scenario. Now, I want to tell you guys a little bit about my story and the identity crises that I have gone through, especially now that I am where I am as a physical therapist. And I want to tell you guys how I typically help people get through them a little bit more than just saying, hey, you know what, it's all going to be okay. So let's chat a little bit more about that. When I was 16 years old, I had my first knee surgery, and by the age of 20, I was up to number 3. Now, the big thing is that I was on my way to number 4 when I decided I was going to go get a second opinion from a physician, somebody I hadn't seen before. I had gone to see him just as for a preliminary visit. He ordered imaging, and then I really went back to sit and dive deeper with him into the imaging. The day that I got to the office, he looked at me and he goes, "You really need to stop playing soccer. You're not going to be a professional. I don't think this makes sense, and it's not something that you can continue to do." You can imagine, as a 20-year-old in that office by myself, college soccer player, that was my identity. This guy all of a sudden just ripped my heart out, put a knife through it, and it was like, what in the world is going on? So I went home and I kind of pondered. I had had a really cruddy collegiate soccer career. I wasn't doing well, I was constantly injured, and there's a lot more to that story, of which I've talked about in the past. So if you haven't, go check out some of our older posts, Food is Fuel, things like that, and read a little bit more about what happened to me then. But the big thing is that I met this man, I trusted him, and it ultimately led me to the decision to quit soccer. So one day, after I went to this appointment, I walked into my coach's office and all 3 of my coaches were there. Head coach, 2 assistants, and I looked at them and with tears rolling down my eyes, I said, "Guys, I don't think that I can do this anymore." And their response to me was, "We never saw this coming in a million years," which is really tough to hear. That day when I stopped playing soccer, I no longer identified as a soccer player. I no longer identified as a collegiate soccer player. And it was a big loss of a sense of myself, which then threw me into this identity crisis. So it's really tough, especially as an injured athlete, because all of a sudden something is ripped from you, you can't do it, and we never want anybody to feel that way. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into, say, 6 things that I recommend that individuals do to help prevent that feeling of hopelessness, to help prevent that feeling of, I don't know what I'm going to do if I never play again. Because there are instances where you may never set foot on a pitch again, but it's very unlikely. So let's go ahead and talk about those factors a little bit deeper. I want you guys to remember that recovery from an injury is not only about being told what to do. It's about finding somebody and finding a team of people whose goals align with yours that are going to get you to the same place. So let's talk about 6 factors that I think really should be implemented, especially if somebody's been injured. The first one I always say is find a supportive care team. Make sure that you have a team of mental health providers, physicians, physical therapists, teachers, anybody who surrounds you that support your goals and that you make goals together and that your visions align. Because otherwise, you may be stuck into a situation that I was stuck in when I was 20. You have a physician who doesn't necessarily see that soccer is your life, and they try to take it away from you. And unfortunately, in my scenario, they did, just because I was uninformed. Find people who are going to inform you to the best of your abilities. Number 2, I always say, set personal goals. You want to make sure that you are making the best decision for yourself and that your goals align with your beliefs. So even if it is that you want to get better at cooking, what are the small steps that are you going to do to get there? If you want to get back on the field, say if you want to play soccer like I always wanted to do, or if you want to get back to running, what are the steps that you need to do to get there? So when I talk about that, I always think strength training. I think about making sure you're training right, making sure you have those support professionals in your care team that are awesome and help you get to where you want to go. So number 3, I always say focus on what you can control, because sometimes you can't. There are things that are out of your control, such as everybody heals at a different rate. Don't compare yourself to others. Make sure that your story is your story and that you don't necessarily let anybody else bring you down or drag you down. You need to remember that you cannot control every little factor into your rehab. Say you had a surgery, you get an infection. Is that always out of your control? No, but it very well can be if you had no idea it was coming. Say you have a stress fracture. Healing times for stress fractures can take a various amount of time based upon many factors. So don't think just because your neighbor or your best friend had one and they were back to running in 6 weeks, that may not be the same scenario for you. And I know that's hard, but remember, focus on what you can focus on. Number 4, find a hobby. This is where I went wrong. Soccer was my hobby, school was my hobby. They're not really hobbies, but I made them my hobby. I focused all of my attention there. So when soccer was ripped from me, I went through an identity crisis. When school was over, I went through an identity crisis. Obviously, I entered the workforce, but I was no longer studying for hours. I was going to work, and my energy didn't transfer well. So the thing is that you really need to make sure that you are doing things outside of the things you love, adding new things you love. And that's something super important to really, really think about. Don't always just kind of jump away from what you love and say, oh, you know what, I'm going to do something different. All right, so let's head on to number 5. Avoid isolation. Obviously, you used to have a posse of people that you were used to being around. For me, it was my soccer team. And what happened when I went through this crisis is I drew away from them. I wasn't going to see them anymore. I wasn't hanging out with my teammates. I kind of took a step back. And that was actually probably one of the worst things I could do. I wasn't surrounding myself with stuff I loved. I was kind of obviously immersing myself in school, which I loved, but it wasn't the same. Remember, those people who have been through your journey with you are more than likely going to be your biggest supporters. And if you don't find that, then there's other people out there that will. Find a new club to join. Join a book club. I know it sounds silly. Join a cooking club. They do exist. Just find something outside of your normal realm to do, because that is super important, especially when you are looking to kind of not enter into this downward spiral of this who am I crisis, right? The last one I throw out there, which is something so difficult, is be optimistic. When I first heard those doctors' words saying, you should never play again, you're just going to continue to get hurt, you're never going to be a professional, I became a pessimist, a big time pessimist, because the one thing I heard was, you're just going to keep getting injured, you're going to need another surgery, you're going to need a tibial osteotomy, you're going to need a knee replacement by your mid-30s. Those are the only things I heard. Nobody ever said to me, if you get strong enough, you can do this. If we continue to work together, we're going to push you forward and you're going to get back on the pitch. Nobody would have told me you need to quit if that was a scenario with the optimistic side of things. And that was super hard for me. Being a pessimist is obviously something that I'm not. I don't like being pessimistic. I love, invigorating people, getting people pumped up, and making sure that I give them the best advice possible. So that is something you need to make sure. Make sure you have great people surrounding you. Try to be optimistic. Make a journal. Write down the things that went great, the things that are going well, and remember, small steps ahead. So guys, those are my 6 things that I think can help people avoid identity crises. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into it, and it's super important to kind of just observe your surroundings. If you do decide that you no longer want to participate in your sport, then we need to find other things to do. And that may be easier said than done. I know that was a scenario with me, but there's ways that we can work around this. So as always, guys, if you have any questions about this, please don't hesitate to ask. It's something I've been through, so I'd really love to hear your stories. So also, put those below. Just as I said, if you have any questions, also put those below. And we look forward to hearing from you guys. And I will be back in a few weeks with some more information for all of you. On what? I don't know yet. But if you have any recommendations, also put that below. All right, guys, have a great one, and I'll be back soon.